Shana Tova. So Jay Leno recently observed in Israel the following. I was stunned by how many Israeli politicians are going to prison. When you ask an Israeli politician what his cell number is, it has a whole other meaning. Such is the state of Israeli politics these days, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has a second chance now in 6 months to form a government, even as he's under threat of indictment. The Hebrew word for elections is bichirot, meaning choice. And so this morning, I want to explain just a little bit about the choice that Israelis are struggling to make now for the second time in a year. And more importantly, I'd like to consider our choices about how we engage with Israel in the year ahead. The chaos of Israeli elections is systemic. On election day, Israelis vote for a party, not a person. The party with the most Knesset seats wins the right to govern, but because of the proliferation of parties, it's rare for one to win a clear majority of Knesset seats. Therefore, to govern, the winning party enters a coalition with smaller parties to form a majority voting bloc, and that coalition requirement thus grants outsized power to fringe parties. There's going to be an exam on this after the service. National elections were held in April. Netanyahu and Likud won the chance to form a coalition, but for the first time in Israeli history, they failed. The Knesset dissolved, and new elections were called for September, producing another razor-thin result between Likud and the new blue and white party led by Benny Gantz. Likud is now discerning whether to form a coalition or share power with blue and white. The news is fluid. Stay tuned. There could be a headline that comes out in the next 15 minutes. So we'll watch as that happens. As Jews outside of Israel, we obviously don't vote, but we do have a bichira, a choice about how we'll engage with Israel in the year ahead. I think about this in terms of the ironclad connection that exists between Israel and America. Writing 100 years ago, Louis Brandeis, the first Jewish justice of our Supreme Court, wrote, "To be good Americans, we must be better Jews, and to be better Jews, we must become Zionists." What he meant is that there's a direct relationship between the dreams that we have for our country here at home in America and those same dreams in Israel. Rabbi John Rossoff calls this approach aspirational Zionism, where we dream of an Israel that doesn't just survive, but also thrives, when it exemplifies the very best of our values. And there are significant aspects of Israel that are, of course, already thriving. We marvel at Israel's reputation as an economic powerhouse driving innovation. We take pride in Israel's humanitarian leadership, sending teams into disaster zones, even to countries it doesn't have diplomatic relationships with. And we salute the soldiers of the IDF, who wake up every morning to protect Israel from rockets that rain down and from the threats that always hover on Israel's borders. For those courageous young people, we pray, may the one who blessed our ancestors bless the soldiers of Israel's defense forces. May the Holy One protect them and save them from all troubles and afflictions, from sickness and injury, and send blessing to all their endeavors. And let's say together, Amen. But there are parts of Israel that aren't thriving. And this is where our aspiration is required. What does it mean to supply aspiration? Churchill wrote, "Criticism may not be agreeable, but it's necessary. It fulfills the same function as pain to the human body. It calls attention to an unhealthy state of things." And in the spirit of Yom Kippur, our feedback presents Israel with the possibility of changing for the better in the year ahead. Our reflection about Israel will focus on three areas: the struggle to establish a pluralistic prayer space at the Western Wall, Israel's intolerance for political dissent, and last year's nation-state law. With each of these, I'll argue that Israel has struggled to transform its democratic ideals into reality. She can aspire to do better. Let's begin with the status of non-Orthodox Jews in Israel and the still incomplete egalitarian prayer space at the Western Wall. In January 2016, the Israeli cabinet reached an historic agreement to allocate 35 million shekels for a new egalitarian space at the southern end of the Western Wall. But criticism from the ultra-Orthodox, whom Netanyahu relies on for his coalition, was furious, and 15 months later, the plan was shelved. The temporary egalitarian space that had already been set up was left untouched. In July of 2018, a massive boulder fell from the upper portion of the wall into the temporary egalitarian area. And it was a miracle that no one was hurt. But repairs have still not been completed. The sad truth is that worshipers who don't want to enter the gender-specific sections have no direct access to the Western Wall. The situation is so upsetting because it ignores the gender equality that we hold sacred. Professor Judith Hauptman elaborates, "If a community recognizes that in all other spheres of life, women occupy the same social standing as men, then it becomes odd and even morally reprehensible to retain the notion of women's inferiority in the religious arena alone. It may be that the Orthodox continue to differentiate by gender, but the Western Wall belongs to all of us. It's time that that sacred space also reflects our community and our values." A Jewish democracy shouldn't just aspire for a plurality of Judaisms. It should also aspire to a plurality of political expressions. This issue begins with the government's recent decision to deny entry to supporters of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement known as BDS. Let me clarify that I strongly oppose BDS. BDS is an organized attempt at delegitimizing Israel. The movement's end goal is Israel's destruction. Given the security concerns for Israel's well-being, let's put the question of denying entry to BDS supporters to the side. I want to focus today on a few examples of the misguided enforcement of that policy. Peter Beinart, a leading voice on the Jewish left, was briefly detained and interrogated when he arrived at Ben Gurion Airport in the summer of 2018. Israel's security service apologized after he was mistakenly flagged, but the blunder raises questions about whether Netanyahu's government sees denial of entry to BDS supporters as political cover for detaining any non-Israeli whose opinion they don't like. There's also the case of Israel supporter and Westchester native Meyer Kaplow. Kaplow, the current chairman of the board at Brandeis University and a past president at Young Israel of New Rochelle, was detained on his way home from Israel. Airport security got nervous when they saw a pamphlet in Kaplow's backpack from the organization called Encounter. Encounter's nonpartisan mission is, quote, to grow the Jewish community's capacity to contribute to a durable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in which all parties live with respect, recognition, and rights. What does it say about the Israeli government that they're threatened by a pro-Israel philanthropist who has a brochure for a dialogue program? As we struggle to make sense of a leader who is so quick to demonize and silence individuals that disagree with him, Netanyahu ought to study the story of the Talmudic rabbis Shammai and Hillel. The Talmud teaches that in matters of dispute between them, Jewish law follows Hillel. The law sides with Hillel because he intentionally cited Shammai's opinion on difficult legal questions. As an expression of humility, Hillel included Shammai's perspective, affirming Shammai's humanity and the legitimacy of his opinion, even if Jewish law disagreed with him. In addition to Jewish pluralism and the question of dissent, Israel faces existential questions about how it relates to its minority population of Arab Israeli citizens. Last night I spoke about anti-Semitism, and there's no question that there are Arabs in the world who hate Jews and are prepared to act on those sentiments. But that doesn't mean that every Arab Israeli citizen of Israel is a threat. And yet, if it were up to the Netanyahu government, the Arab citizens of Israel would be marginalized. We saw that during these last two rounds of voting when Likud activists used scare tactics to frighten Arab Israelis from voting. And Arab Israelis have been discriminated against in more subtle ways for years by Israel. Consider the issue of road signage. As far back as the early 1920s, Israeli law has expected that every road sign in Israel would be written in Hebrew, English, and Arabic. And those who have visited Israel know that on interstate highways, that's still largely true today. But signage in Israel's small and medium-sized cities don't always follow that practice. It's a particular issue in mixed municipal areas with substantial Jewish and Arab populations. According to Adallah, the legal center for Arab minority rights in Israel, 80% of the signage in those mixed communities lacks Arabic. In 1999, Adallah filed a lawsuit which went to the Supreme Court. The court affirmed that Arabic has a privileged status in Israel, and the road signs must include Arabic in mixed communities. Up until the arrival of electronic signage in the last year or so, that ruling was never implemented. The nation-state law passed recently sheds light on the state's ambivalence toward Arab rights. While the nation-state law that passed was less stringent than its original version, the law is a step toward formalizing Arab Israelis' status as second-class citizens in Israel. Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai, in the months after the Six-Day War victory in 1967, cautioned Israelis against denigrating Arabs. He included this poem in his collection, Jerusalem 1967. On Yom Kippur, he wrote, I put on dark holiday clothing and I walked to the old city in Jerusalem. I stood a long time before a crypt-like shop of an Arab not far from the Damascus gate, a shop of buttons and zippers and spools of thread in every color, and snaps and buckles, a light of splendor and many colors, like an open holy ark. I said to him in my heart that my father also had a shop just like this, filled with thread and buttons. I explained to him in my heart about all the tens of years and the factors and events that I am now here, and that my father's shop is burned down over there, and he is buried here. And when I finished, it was the hour of Ne'ilah, when the gates close in heaven at the end of Yom Kippur, and he too lowered the shutters and locked the gate, and I returned home with all the worshipers. Keep in mind that Amichai was born in Germany and didn't emigrate with his family until 1936. He's sympathetic with the frustrations of the Arab shopkeeper because he knows that the story of the Arab is not so different from the story of the Jew. There's a danger in Israel of labeling Arab citizens as different and less than. The land that we aspire to build embraces diversity. The aspirational vision I've shared with you this morning concerning religious pluralism, open dissent, and equality for all of those pieces are already enshrined in Israel's Declaration of Independence. Her founding document makes it clear that Israel's founders shared the same aspirations that we do. As the text notes, the state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration, for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. And it will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. As we prepare to cross into the year ahead, we have our own bechira, our own choice to make about Israel and her future. Will we choose to ignore Israel in our communal conversation and identity, or will we choose to bring Israel back into the center with an aspirational hope that she might come to embody the very best values of our tradition? We can make that choice first by casting a vote in an election that we are allowed to participate in. Every few years, the World Zionist Congress elects delegates to decide how best to disperse a portion of the money raised by the Jewish Agency for Israel. The Reform Movement has a slate of candidates in the election to maximize the disbursement of funds to Israeli projects in alignment with our values and our vision. We'll be working to facilitate voting here in January and February. Stay tuned for more details so that your voice can be heard. We can also bring Israel back to the center of an American Jewish conversation by choosing not to lose faith in the goodness and the worth of what Israel represents. Naomi Shemer, in her immortal song, Al Kol Eila, writes of the paradox that is modern Israel. Al hadvash ve'al ha'oketz. It's the honey and the sting. Al hamar ve'hamatok. It's the bitter and the sweet. for the ones we love and for the countries we love, we accept the sting even as we wait for honey. We accept the bitter even as we work for sweetness. Al na ta'akor natua, do not uproot what has been planted. Al tishkach et hatikva, and never forget, never ever forget the hope. Shana Tova.
על הדבש ועל העוקץ, על המר והמתוק, על ביתנו התינוקת שמורי לי הטוב, על האיש המבוערת, על המים הזכים, על האיש השב הביתה מן המרחקים, על כל אלה